So FBI counteragent Carl Prussian wrote in a sworn affidavit to Congress, I further swear and attest that Martin Luther King Jr. was always set forth as the individual to whom communists should look and rally around. I hereby also state that Martin Luther King Jr. has either been a member of or wittingly has accepted support from over 60 communist fronts, individuals, and or organizations.
Luther King was in support of reparations, affirmative action. He was also in support of racial quotas in the workforce. Basically anything that you can think of in terms of the racialist policies that we see now, he would have gone on to support.
What's up, guys? VinceDao here. Be sure to like and subscribe if you are new. So this is going to be a controversial video, I'm sure, even among my own conservative audience, but it needs to be said. Please hear me out, okay? Tomorrow is MLK Day. And tomorrow is a day where most conservatives will celebrate MLK off the cliche that he was this virtuous, colorblind peace leader because they heard one speech in grade school. Many will use the I have a dream speech as a case against the left. They will say, well, the left isn't really about that, and maybe that's true, but it should be noted that MLK really wasn't about that either. What I'm going to touch on in this video is that when we delve into the real history of MLK, we realize that the mainstream conservative cliche over the guy is completely wrong. And MLK was actually a pretty far left communist sympathizer who sought the destabilization of the United States. Actually, I will go one step further than that. He was a communist. I'm going to say that. We'll talk about it in a bit. But he was not the apolitical, colorblind peace leader that you're taught. And beyond that, he is not and never was someone deserving of such a huge federal holiday. Why am I making this video? Well, I'm not saying that the GOP should make their platform to abolish MLK Day, okay? That's not realistic, nor do I ever expect this to gain a lot of traction, but I simply hope that my viewers can at least have a better understanding of how badly you are lied to about history by liberalism. And that goes back a lot further than just the crazy stuff they started pushing 5 years ago. I would also say that in many ways, MLK is the moral foundation that things like the modern liberal state and the woke diversity regime are built upon. That is his legacy. Modern America is his America. And if conservatives want to seriously fix these things, I think we should start by discrediting the moral foundation that they are built upon. So let's get started. Now, one last thing I will say is that we are currently doing some members only videos on the history of MLK, civil rights, and the historical South. So if you want to hear the full story, consider becoming a member at the VinceDao Patriot tier or above. But this video will mainly focus on the pretty blatant communist sympathies of MLK, which is to say that when conservatives look at the modern left and say, well, MLK wasn't about this, yeah, he actually was, and that's part of the problem with accepting the same MLK deity status that the left does. Okay, long intro, but let's get started. So the first thing I have to do is break you from the idea that MLK was just about I have a dream, because people will always revert back to that. He was just about this one speech, his most optical speech, because he was speaking to such a large audience, by the way, and that was it. And I'll say, we do not apply this standard to any other figure. Do we say that Barack Obama was all about hope and love because he gave some nice speeches in 2008? Or do we remember him as the horrible liberal that he actually was? Do we say that Joe Biden is all about unity because that's what he said in his inauguration speech? Or do we recognize that his moderate rhetoric was total gaslighting, and he is a highly divisive radical figure. If this is how we judge literally everyone else, why does MLK get to be defined in our eyes by one speech? Is it maybe possible that he talked like that to persuade a large country of white American moderates, and his real agenda was a lot more radical? Is that possible? And what's important to understand about MLK is that much like 2008 Obama or even kinda 2020 Joe Biden, MLK was masterful at cloaking very radical ideas under the guise of vague, seemingly moderate rhetoric. The second thing I will say, because I know that MLK is such a deified figure in American society that I kind of have to shake you of the conditioning to even get you to question him, my question is that, are you willing to admit as a conservative that if you think that so much of what you are taught in history is a liberal lie, which it is, are you maybe willing to extend that same standard to MLK? That's all I'm asking, okay? At least have an open mind about it, and it's hard to get people to even do that. Okay, so firstly, it's important to note how much of a honeypot of communists, socialists, and radicals that MLK's movement was. Sounds a lot like Black Lives Matter, huh? Now, we remember MLK as being the anti-radical guy who pushed back on the crazies, just like Joe Biden was pictured as the anti-radical Democrat in 2020, right? Come on. Now, let's look at some of MLK's top allies. So, Jesse Jackson, very psychotic radical leftist, I'm sure you've heard about Jesse Jackson, was mentored by none other than Martin Luther King. John Lewis, very renowned leftist and Trump-hating lunatic, famously one of the top guys in MLK's movement. Now, I know MLK has one niece who is a pro-life conservative, and good for her, but to my knowledge, all of MLK's biological children are leftists. But there's one guy I really want to draw attention to, who is Clarence Jones. Now, Clarence Jones was one of MLK's top advisors, lawyers, and speechwriters. In fact, he himself was the author of the I Have a Dream speech. Clarence Jones was a literal communist. Reading from Stanford University, quote, Jones was drafted into the Army in August 1953, but was given an undesirable discharge as a security risk in 1955 for refusing to sign the Armed Forces Loyalty Certificate, stating that he was not a member of the Communist Party. FBI reports compiled in 1957 identified Jones as a member and leader of the Labor Youth League, described as a Communist Party front organization during his years at Columbia. Again, top advisor to MLK, the guy who wrote the I Have a Dream speech, literal communist. They don't tell you that in history, do they? But I'm sure MLK himself was not a communist, though, right? He was just surrounded by them. Actually, though, he was on our side. Well then, okay, let's get in now to what MLK himself actually believed. And he had a long history of fighting for far left movements, but we don't have time to get into all of it. So I call into attention this speech he gave in 1967 about the Vietnam War called Beyond Vietnam. And this was arguably MLK's most controversial speech ever, because instead of simply saying that America didn't belong in the war, America first, whatever, because whether you agree with that or not, you could write that off as a pretty reasonable policy position. No, he instead gave pretty open support for the North Vietnamese cause and the worldwide revolution for Marxism. Don't believe me? Well, here's an excerpt. Quote, "I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values." Wow. Oh, not a communist, by the way. Let's continue. "We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered." Wow. Full mask off. Definitely not a communist, though, right? Definitely wouldn't support BLM today. Definitely doesn't talk just like BLM. Actually, MLK was on our side. Actually, MLK was a moderate who wanted everyone to love each other. And actually, the only people critical of MLK were the evil Jim Crow Democrats. I'm sure the 168 newspapers across America who denounced the speech were all racist Southern Democrat newspapers. Really? Well, that's interesting because listen to what Barry Goldwater, 1964 Republican nominee, mentor to Ronald Reagan, and probably a hero to most of you, said about the speech, quote, "It could border a bit on treason." Was Barry Goldwater an evil racist Democrat, folks? Are we going to disavow Barry Goldwater now? Or are we going to recognize that MLK was a pretty transparent communist? I prefer the latter. But now that you know the truth about MLK and his movement and his actual beliefs, again, worldwide revolution, here's my question. How did he manage to reach the level of deification that he has today? Because MLK today is literally venerated by more Americans than Jesus Christ. That sounds like weird to say out loud, but think about it. It's factual. It's absolutely true. It is seen as deeply controversial to even remotely criticize the guy in any way on either side of the political aisle. And that's where MLK Day comes in. Because as you could imagine, MLK was a growingly unpopular figure in America by the time of his assassination due to his constant coddling of communists and far left movements. The idea of the MLK holiday received significant pushback in the 1980s for the same reasons, and that's often forgotten. But much like Juneteenth, it got through, and through 40 years of the cultural impact of this holiday, MLK has become a figure in American society who, again, is literally more venerated than Jesus Christ. You see how easily the left can manufacture a fake cultural consensus into existence through the use of politics? So if you ask me, I think there are far more great Americans throughout history deserving of a federal holiday than the adulterous, communist, anti-American troublemaker known as MLK. That's all I'm saying. And I basically never expect that to change. Like I said, I think the left has essentially succeeded in making one of America's most successful communists into a deity above Jesus, above the founding fathers. But at least now you know the truth about that individual. At least now you see how you were lied to about history. And I don't know, maybe it'll help you start to question whether a lot of the things you believe are actually true. That's all I'm saying. That's the hope of this video. And just FYI, that's why you won't get a happy MLK Day post from me tomorrow. I'm curious how many subscribers I'll lose from this video because, like I said, despite the fact that he was a communist dirtbag and we went over that in this video, MLK has reached such deity status among conservatives that they are basically offended on his behalf if you criticize him. So, that's interesting. I don't know. If you purport yourself to be a free thinker and all that stuff, Think about what I'm saying, okay? That's all I'm asking. But yeah, okay, folks, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm sure there will be a lot of interesting discussion, to say the least. Remember to like and subscribe, and until next time, Alpha moves only. God bless. Like and subscribe. Do it. Do it. Unless you hated the video, in which I don't know what else to tell you. And peace.